morning, Facebook friends and family. Hope you're having a blessed morning today. Looks like a little rain, at least in PA, potential for the morning, but this afternoon seems to be nice and looking forward to a sunshiny day tomorrow because I have some painting to do on my car. This morning, a good deal of my devotions were um, in Mark 9, verses 14 through 29. Um, and I decided to talk about that this morning because specifically Mark 9, 23, and 24 have really always intrigued me. So today's study title is, "And he said, I believe, Jesus. Um, Help me with my unbelief," which in some respects sort of sounds a little bit like an oxymoron. I believe, but help me with my unbelief. But as recorded in Mark 9:14 through 29, the father of a young man um, who's from childhood had been plagued with an evil spirit that would cause him to have what the Bible describes, and the closest terminology I can kind of come up with is almost like epileptic seizures, and you kind of envision with the foaming of the mouth rabies, though it was an evil spirit. I've always been intrigued by this story in the Bible and the conversations that Jesus has with both his disciples and the boy's father, as well as the crowds, the multitudes of crowds that are gathering, even the religious leaders that are gathering and watching. So it's an opportunity for Jesus to really, as he does so elegantly, speak words that speak life into all situations. And, in particular in verses 23 and 24, now follow me. In verse 22, the boy's father says the spirit has often tried to kill his son by throwing him in fire and or water. And then he proceeds to say, "But if you can do anything, take pity on us and help." Doesn't necessarily sound like, the disciples had already, kind of setting the stage here, the disciples had already tried to rebuke the spirit from the boy, but they were unable to. So, you can hear sort of a tone of doubt. It's almost like a cry to just anybody that happens to be passing by that, but if there is anything you can do, have pity on me. Rather than maybe, and I don't want to judge because I don't know, how any of us would have approached this had we been in the same situation. But, what we know of Jesus now is more that he has love for us. So to me, pity really just doesn't seem to really adhere to Jesus's character. So, here's a father who's desperate, but he's not exhibiting a lot of faith. Now, in verse 23, here comes the first of the next few intriguing things that have always really just made me want to dive in deeper and better understand and correlate that to how we just as Christians on a day-to-day basis, I mean, when we listen to the story, it's kind of like, huh, well, where's the guy's faith? But we're a lot more like the Father than we sometimes give ourselves um, proper credit for being. And I don't mean that in a positive way. I mean we're a lot more doubting Thomases than we think. So um, what Jesus says appears, and he's somewhat says it in what appears to be rather bold. And again, remember, I really believe he's speaking to more than one audience, not just the Father. And he says, if you can, with a big question mark. And yes, like I said, it's bold, and it's a question. It's like, if you can. Um, and then he says, everything is possible for one who believes. Now, here's the part that follows in verse 24 that I always seem to focus on and meditate on when I read the Gospel of Mark. And that is, immediately the boy's father exclaims, I do believe. Help me overcome my unbelief. And that is the part that really causes me to hone in on, and it kind of makes me go, I do believe, but help me with my unbelief. First, in verse 23, I believe the sentiment here that he quotes reflects the climate of the entire crowd. The father himself is having a hard time believing Jesus can save his boy, especially when his disciples couldn't. The scribes who are there don't believe Jesus' power comes from God at all, as earlier mentioned in Mark 3:22. And the disciples' limited level of faith isn't directed to God where it should be. So, like in Nazareth, the collective lack of faith threatens the possibility of a miracle happening, as exhibited in Mark 6:1-6. So Jesus isn't saying that we can accomplish anything if we have enough faith. This isn't the endorsement of a name it and claim it teaching. True faith, doesn't presume that God will do everything that we want, or everything that we believe in, or everything we believe in the way we want it to. But it does presume that God can do anything he wants. As Mark, the Gospel of Mark starts off very early in chapter 1, verses 40-42. So Jesus will expand this truth from the healing of salvation when he tells his disciples that the rich man he saved can only be saved through God's power and not the man's intent. Mark 10:25-27. So, a rich man, being saved can be saved less likely than, a camel can go through an eye of a needle. So if the scribes, have been reiterating the accusations that Jesus' power comes from Satan, which they constantly accused, and of course, some of the Pharisees and so forth would speak against that, how could good come from evil? But the general consensus was that they were saying that, his power comes from evil. So then Jesus is telling the Father to choose whom he's going to believe. Is he going to believe in Jesus, or is he going to believe in the failure of the disciples, whose focus was not on God when they were trying to heal? Or is he going to believe in Jesus, the one and only true Son of God? Now, when we move on to verse 24, I believe, help me with my unbelief. There is a lot here at play. The man's request, startling, in its paradoxical, I always have a hard time pronouncing that word, but its paradoxical phrasing, or almost contradicting phrasing, is quite thought provoking, and that's the one that always gets me, which is why I've always been intrigued by this story in the Gospel of Mark. After all, how can the man say he believes and at the same time ask for help in overcoming unbelief? So, just to give you an analogy. Oh, I've got enough power and strength to lift up that rock, but please help me lift up that rock. I don't know if that's the exact same illustration, but it should kind of get the point across. It's sort of an oxymoron, or a contradiction of sense. So the full context of the man's prayer, I believe, help my unbelief, helps make his meaning more clearer. Jesus has just returned from the Mount of Transfiguration, in the chapter before, well, in the verses before, when he comes down upon this large crowd surrounding his disciples. And there's an argument taking place. People are stirred up. Jesus asks what's going on, and a man from the crowd explained that the disciples had been trying to heal or cast this demon out of this man's son and had failed after multiple attempts. And Jesus, sort of in frustration, says, "You unbelieving generation, how long must I be with you? How long shall I put up with you?" Again, like with yesterday's lesson on Jesus's boldness, Jesus spoke pretty bold and it's pretty true. How long should I put up with you? Bring the boy to me, he says in Mark 9:19. So the boy was brought to Jesus, but when the spirit saw Jesus, he immediately started thrashing and throwing the boy around into convulsions. He fell to the ground. He rolled around, foaming at the mouth. After the boy's father further explained his son's condition, he said to Jesus, "If you can do anything," again, we're reiterating, "take pity on us," again from verse 22. And Jesus assured the man that everything is possible for those who believe. Immediately the boy's father, as I'm constantly intrigued by, "I do believe, help me overcome my unbelief." Upon hearing the man's request, "I believe, help my unbelief," Jesus immediately spoke to the unclean spirit and permanently cast it out of the boy. No ifs, ands, or buts about it. Out of there. Later, Jesus' disciples inquired as to, well, why weren't they able to cast the demon out? Jesus told them this kind of, spirit requires a lot of prayer. And essentially, I take that as connectivity with God, which Jesus alludes to earlier, that they really just do not have that connectivity with God, because how long shall I be around you? How long, how many times do I have to show you or tell you, explain to you, give by example to you where the power comes from? So the dominant theme of this passage seems to be faith and doubt. initial response to hearing the boy's condition, expresses his disappointment in the lack of faith from everybody. The lack of faith from, the scribes who thought he was from, his power was from Satan. The lack of faith from his disciples, his own people who followed him closely. I mean, called him teacher. And there they were, all being D, maybe E students that day. And even the father's lack of unbelief. The boy's father initially seems to display a lack of faith, when he asked Jesus to do something for the boy, if you can. Jesus picks up on this doubt and repeating the man conditional statement found in verse 23. So, in essence, he responds by saying, what do you mean if I can? The guy just basically put, having a background with programming, what if statements, conditional statements, that if, this happens, then execute this program, but if this happens, then execute this program. So this guy's got this if statement going on, and Jesus goes, what do you mean if I can? He goes on to assure the man that anything is possible for one who has faith. So it appears that the only thing preventing the man's son from being healed in this particular instance is faith. And he realizes that he already portrayed a lack of faith. I mean, there's no doubt about it. He wants to express faith. He wants to have faith. But at the same time, he's being genuine. He's being real. And I think that is something that Jesus can appreciate. And because he, even though holy God, holy man, he walked and knew what it was like to be one of us, he could appreciate this father's genuineness. So he says, the father says, so he, I do believe, help me to overcome my unbelief. And Jesus understands that. So in essence, he says, my faith is far from perfect. I may not have enough faith. If my faith is not enough, please help me to make it enough. Because you are the one, translated, put it like this, I do have faith, but please help me to have even more faith, because Jesus, you are the one that can give me more faith. You are the power, you are the source. So Jesus is pleased with his response, and he heals the boy. So most Christians today can identify with the man. I know I can from time to time. It is acknowledgement of our inadequacy, that God, God is in our lives, and God can take care of everything that we need taken care of. This is true even at the point of salvation. Salvation comes to us through faith, and it is significantly faith in that unseen. So, it requires us to have an adequate level of faith that sometimes, with things pulling on us, we have to acknowledge first off that of our own righteousness, we cannot be saved. We need to believe in Jesus. But as we go through life, and its challenges and things that pull on us, there are times when our faith is greater and our faith is weaker. So, we need to constantly go back to the source as Jesus went back to the Father to pray, to re energize himself in order to carry out his mission. I believe there is a huge emphasis in, Mark 9 and these verses that we visited today, that we need to be able to go to God and say, I believe, but I'm struggling with doubt. Be transparent, be real, be genuine, and let him know. Help me where my faith is falling short. Or as the Father said, I believe, help me with my unbelief. We don't seem to have enough faith to follow him in every moment of every day. So we ask, we pray, or we should be asking and praying for more faith. We acknowledge that even our faith comes from God. So God is our one and only source. So realistically, what seems to be an irony in the Father's statement is really an acknowledgement that faith comes from God. So when we are lacking faith, we go to the source and we ask for more faith. It is his work in our lives that enables us to believe and obey in everything, and especially in our blessed hope and salvation. So hopefully you found that to be interesting. I know that I do. Every time that I read it, it's encouraging, because Lord knows there are days, many, many days, many moments that I need to turn to God, the source, the author and finisher of my faith. And I need to say, I believe. Help me where I am doubting. Help me with my unbelief. Have a blessed day. Look forward to seeing you tomorrow. You'll be in my prayers. And again, encourage your friends to visit Reflections of a Savior. Like the page, subscribe to it, interact. I see a lot of people watching the videos. I don't get a lot of comments. Maybe that's a good thing. But I always welcome feedback, or anything that you may, desire that I might speak on to help you with whatever you're struggling with. If it's something that I feel that the Lord has anointed me to be able to speak on as well. So, always looking forward to your comments. Appreciate your viewership and appreciate every one of you. And thank you for this platform to be able to come to you each and every day. Whether it's, 1.2 thousand people, as some of my videos have been viewed, or it's a handful. It depends on, the day, what's going on, the topic, etc. It doesn't matter. If I help just one, then I know God is pleased. And sometimes if I help just me by doing this, and it helps me in my walk to be a better Christian and be a better servant to the Lord, then it's worth it as well. But spread the news, share it with your friends, and I look forward to seeing you tomorrow. All right? Have a great day.